The views and opinions expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of Natural Bridges Media or KSQD's staff, volunteers, or underwriters.
Hello and welcome to Talk of the Bay. I am your host, Len B.A., and with me today is Richard Hodge. When he was a young man of college age, Richard Hodge attended a seminary and thought he was going to become a Methodist minister. As the fates would have it, he instead went on to become a lawyer who defended some of the most notorious and politically charged crime cases in America, including the Oakland 7, the Soledad 3, and Los Siete. He later developed a specialization in entertainment law and represented a wide range of clients, including Richard Brodigan, Kenny Loggins, the Steve Miller Band, Boz Scaggs, and many others. He eventually became a judge in the Alameda County Superior Court, where he served for 20 years, adjudicating hundreds of cases, including the landmark water rights case, Environmental Defense Fund versus East Bay Municipal Utility District. He also served as Justice Pro Tem on the First District Court of Appeals on 4 occasions. He has lectured extensively before attorney organizations, environmental organizations, and educational institutions, including the Practicing Law Institute, at Bolt Hall at UC Berkeley, at Hastings Law School, and Golden Gate Law School. Now retired, Richard Hodge lives in Santa Cruz and is here to share stories and insights gained from his long legal career. Richard Hodge, welcome to Talk of the Bay.
Well, thank you, Len.
Great to have you here. As a young man, you were attending a Methodist seminary on the path to become a minister. How did it happen that you changed course and became a lawyer instead?
All right, I'm glad you asked. My career as a judge in California commenced in a pulpit in the town of Martins Ferry, Ohio, in a Methodist church when I was 15 years old. And they had a special service one day. The Methodist minister there went on vacation in August, like the psychiatrists. And the elders of the church decided that they wanted to have a special service where there was a young man who spoke and a middle-aged man who spoke and an older person who spoke, and I was the young man. And I gave a sermon, and I had never given a sermon before, but the sermon created quite a, I don't want to say a sensation, that's overdoing, but there's quite a bit of interest. Mm-hmm. And I began to preach at the age of 15 in the churches around the Ohio River Valley. And whenever the ministers went on vacation, I would show up and give a sermon. And so I was doing that for a while. And my sermons were fairly basic. I mean, I spoke Sermon on the Mount, basic Christian theology as I learned it in Sunday school. But there was nothing fancy about it. But it seemed as if the elders of my community had decided that my course was going to be a Methodist bishop or better. And so I started preaching, and then along those lines, I had begun very early on to have some questions about my grasp of the Christian theology. It was very challenging. If you think about it, it's challenging. The Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost, whoa, wait a minute, what's that all about? And if you start getting into it from a theological perspective, it's real complicated. But I had some wisdom at that age, and the wisdom was, I don't get this, so I'm going to go to Ohio Wesleyan, and I'm going to learn it. So I went to Ohio Wesleyan to learn the theological foundations for what I was already preaching around the circuit. And but then I went to Ohio Wesleyan, and things didn't get any better. The more I learned about it, the more questions I had, and I was really concerned about it. In the meantime, though, I had become the pastor of the North Canaan Methodist Church outside of Ohio Wesleyan. And that happened because in the Methodist Church, you could get a special preacher's license, which permits you to do everything in the church except administer the sacrament. So I got the license, and I had my own church, a country church, just like you would picture in your mind at the crossroads of a number of cornfields, and I preached the gospel. And you say, well, what caused me to change? I was preaching along very happily on the course that had been set out for me. And then I saw a movie and read a book.
What was the movie?
And it changed my life. And it changed a lot of people's life. And I'll give you a few hints, and then you can tell me what the movie was. At the end of his career, Gregory Peck took a tour around the United States, a farewell tour. And they did a documentary on it. And every step along the way, every town he went into, there was a whole assemblage, a whole cadre of lawyers who said the same thing I just said. I was on the path to something else, and I saw this movie, and Gregory Peck, you changed my life. Might say Harper Lee changed the lives because she wrote the book in the movie. And that was the same with me. Now, you tell me what the movie was.
To Kill a Mockingbird.
To Kill a Mockingbird. Len, that's the reason I decided to come on your show, because I figured you'd answer that question. And if we had a live audience in this community, I rather think that if we had the show of hands, I think probably 80% of the people would get that.
Yeah, anybody who's seen the movie.
Yeah. But the movie and the book. And the movie made an enormous impression upon me. And to get right to it, I wanted to be Atticus Finch. Mm-hmm. I didn't think I had the stuff to become Jesus Christ, so I wanted to be Atticus Finch. I thought maybe that was within my grasp. Yeah. And that is what motivated me as much as anything. And from that mustard seed, I went to the University of Chicago Law School, which, as you know, is a preeminent law school in this country. But it's also a law school that's designed to graduate the leaders of commerce and industry and government. And in my class of 100 or so, I think we had maybe 4 people that wanted to be lawyers of criminal lawyers of any sort, and 3 of those wanted to be prosecutors. And then there was me. And so that's how I got into it.
Yeah.
In answer to your question.
Wow. And you worked early in your career. You worked in a district attorney's office as a prosecutor. What did you learn from that experience, and why did you decide you'd rather be a defense attorney? Well,
now if the perceptive listener would think you and I had rehearsed this. We have not rehearsed this. But that was on my list of things that I wanted to mention, and it's an interesting question. I went into the district attorney's office in Contra Costa County as a deputy district attorney, and I didn't go there to become a killer prosecutor. I could have been a killer prosecutor, but I did not go in there to be a killer prosecutor. I went there to learn, I don't want to say the tricks of the trade, but to learn the trade.
Yeah, there's a process.
There's a process, and there's much to be learned. When I went to Chicago, I took a year-long course on prosecutorial discretion, which I thought was a credit to the school. But I did not want to have on my conscience a conviction against one of my clients that occurred because I was inexperienced or not fully conversant in the field. So I did that as a training exercise for myself. And I must say, it was a wonderful training exercise. I can't imagine I could have ever gotten any better experience. I'll just say this one thing. I went in there, and the first day they took me around, showed me where the courts are in Contra Costa. There's quite a number of them. The second day I walked into my office expecting to be shown the coffee machine and the secretarial bowl, and they handed me a file and said, go down to San Pablo, and you've got a trial down there, jury trial, and you're trying it. And so that was my first.
Way
that was my
to
first
start
day.
off.
Yeah. It was great. I learned lessons in that first trial that have stayed with me to this minute. But we won't get into it because otherwise we'll be here forever.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I took a look around and tried to get acquainted with some of the criminal cases you were involved in. Among the many cases you were involved in, you defended the Oakland Seven, which was a group of people involved in draft resistance work. They were accused of conspiracy to start a riot. You also defended the Soledad Three, who were inmates who were accused of killing a prison guard, and Los Siete, who were accused of killing a policeman. So I wondered if among those stories, at least pick one. Would you like to start with one that you'd like to talk about?
I could pick anyone, and you and I talked for about 3 hours a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
And I had a joyous time. I really commend you for staying with me on that. But we talked about all these cases, and I could spend an hour here on any one of them or any of them. But let's pick Soledad 7, just because first it's local, so it occurred at the Soledad prison.
Yeah, and Soledad gets our radio signal, so.
Oh, well, there you go. Well, if anybody's there, I'm still around. It was a case that was resonant in the larger community and resonant in the politics and social issues that were really front and center in the Bay Area at that time. People may remember George Jackson. Mm-hmm. He was the main defendant, if you will, in the San Quentin murder case. But basically what had happened is the guards and maybe the authorities at Soledad Prison were having trouble with some of the inmates. And what they did, they set up literally a confrontation between the white inmates and the black inmates. Mm-hmm. It was destined for a disaster. There was bad blood between them. It was an unsupervised meeting in the yard, which they had never done in that fashion before. And true enough, some fights broke out, and the guards killed 3 inmates. And they were all black. And part of the black community in the prison system made a vow of vengeance. You kill 3 of us, we're going to kill 3 of you, 3 guards. And they did. And one of them was the guards at San Quentin, which led to the San Quentin 7, and George Jackson, which got international headlines, particularly when George Jackson's younger brother came into the court armed and assassinated the judge and killed some people in the courtroom, and ultimately was assassinated by himself. That stirred up attention, you might add. Now, the Soledad 7 case down here had nothing quite that dramatic, but basically it was born of the same situation. And what happened in that case, at the Soledad prison, that some of you may know, there's a guard shack that sits right in the middle of the yard where they keep their supplies and the gardening tools and stuff like that. And one morning, 8:30, when all the prisoners in the Soledad prison are being circulated throughout the Cisentus classes and whatnot, a guard was murdered in that guard shed. And because of where it was situated in the time of the murder, virtually every inmate in that prison was a potential witness to the murder, because they were looking from all different angles of the prison as they moved around. And so the murder occurred. This guard was stabbed 26 times, and it was a tragedy. This guy had nothing to do with these things. He was a symbol. Right. But they were having a hard time finding out who did it. So they did an intensive search through the prison, mostly in the form of interviews. And this is a fact that lends resonance, if you will, to preparation. Because what we did, and the lawyers were Patrick Hallinan, one of my dear friends, and in my opinion, one of the best criminal lawyers in the history of the state, and Larry Horan, who is very prominent down here in Monterey County, and me. That's a whole other story. We won't go there. But we didn't hire, we had a group of volunteers from Bolt Hall who came down and interviewed every potential witness in the prison under court order. And we were able, this is before computers, incidentally.
Right.
We were able to piece together, through infinite work of the kids and Patrick Hallinan, basically a timeline where we virtually knew where every one of our clients was and most of the inmates were at any given moment around the time of the death. So we had this case infinitely better figured out than the prosecutors did. But they also, they fell into the trap of not being imaginative. And what happened was the warden called into his office a whole bunch of inmates. And his mistake was, and it cost him the case, his mistake was that he gave the same interrogation, almost word for word, to everybody. So we've got our first main witness on the stand. We're just getting into the case. We're expecting to be going for months. A guy by the name of Brizendine. And he testifies, just quite out front and very convincingly, yeah, he was a certain vantage point, and he saw my client, Roosevelt Williams, come out of the shed just at the time of the murder. Well, we knew exactly where Roosevelt was at all times at that point. He was nowhere close to the scene. He wasn't in the yard. He was back up in the regular part of the pen. And so we had some confidence as we went forward that we were going to show that this was not accurate. But you never know. You never know. And so I had him on the witness on cross-examination. And because I knew from the work these kids did in examining all the other witnesses, I said, well, Mr. Brizendine, do you remember being called into the warden's office? He said, well, yes. And he had you sit in that, there was a leather chair in there, wasn't there? And he had you sit in the leather chair. Now, had you ever been invited into the warden's office before? No. Had you ever been invited to sit in that leather chair? And the warden gave you a cigar, did he not? Now, had the warden ever given you a cigar? No, sir. And he showed you a wanted poster that was on the wall, a $25,000 reward for giving information, did he not? Yeah. And then he said to you, now, Roosevelt, I know you know something about this case because we know that you're involved in some way. So we know that you know something about it. And either you tell us what you know about it and tell us who was in that shed, or you are going to spend the rest of your life in prison. We will bury you in here. Same words. Same words. Wow. Well, as this conversation is going on, he's on the witness stand testifying, you could just see him starting to sweat bullets because he's wondering, this was before cameras were everywhere in the world, so he was wondering, how in the name of heaven do I know all this stuff?
Yeah.
Unless there was a recording device, or unless someone blew the whistle on him or whatever. And he was thinking to himself, now do I have a perjury charge? What's going on? I said, and when he said he's going to bury you, you believed him, didn't you? And he had the power to do it, and it terrified you, didn't it? And when you testified here before today, you were terrified. And when you testified today, you were terrified that if you didn't identify Roosevelt Williams, you were going to be in prison for the rest of your life. He says, that's true. And I said, isn't it also true that everything you said in this case about what you saw in the shed is a fabrication? It's a lie. You did not see what you testified to this jury. He says, that's true. I did not see it. I said,
there goes their evidence.
I was sensitive to the cardinal rule of don't ask a follow-up question when you got that question.
Right.
What was it that Abraham Lincoln, the case he had about a guy who was charged with biting another fellow's ear off, and he said, well, did you, on cross-examination, the lawyer said, well, did you see him bite the ear off? No. Well, then how did you know he bit it off? He said, because I saw him spit it out. Well, so you don't ever want to ask.
As long as you got the answer you need.
That's right. So anyway, that was the Soledad 7 case. And that case had a very happy ending. If I can, I know we got a lot of stuff to cover, but I get started on these and I get worked up about it. We thought that they would still bury him in prison because he was there on a felony, and he could have spent a long time in prison.
Yeah.
And I wrote a letter to the parole board in advance, and I thought this is a letter that might be usable maybe 6 months, a year, or 2 years from now, and it would be there saying I'd offered him a job in my law firm, which was in this wonderful Victorian building in San Francisco. And, about 3 months later, Roosevelt comes knocking on my door.
Oh, he got out.
He got out.
Yeah.
And he worked with us and lived with us for a while in my law office over there.
Yeah.
So that's the Soledad 7.
Yeah.
Some very good books written about it.
Yeah.
Marjorie Hines' book, H-E-I-N-S.
For listeners who may just be tuning in, my guest is Richard Hodge. Richard Hodge was a criminal attorney for some of the most politically charged crime cases in America back in the 70s and 80s, and also became a Superior Court judge with Alameda County. And so Judge Hodge is sharing some stories with us. I meant to ask you earlier, Richard, you were involved in a case that involved the legal status of marijuana. What was that about?
Well, that was interesting, and you have to see it in historical context because the marijuana laws have gone through an infinity of changes. I had to look it up today to see if it's still the way it was, but back in the day, first of all, you have to understand, and it leads into some of the things you said you were going to ask me about, like the music business and the entertainment business, and there is, of course, as you can appreciate, a strong confluence between the marijuana business and the music industry. So in any event, I had a case where a couple very young people, college students, had gotten caught with a fairly large amount of marijuana. I mean, not tons of kilos, but a lot of marijuana. And they were charged with it, and they had gotten caught red-handed.
And this is back when it was a felony, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And it was back at a time, and when I started practicing law, and how I got started in this partly because I didn't know anybody in San Francisco. I mean, kids were going to jail for this. Kids were going to jail for a joint. They were having their lives ruined by it. We had a district court, a court of appeal justice here who was charged with growing some marijuana on his back porch. And as a consequence of that, he was kicked off the bench, which was one of the greatest travesties that I can recall, because he was probably the smartest and best appellate court judge that we had at that time, and he lost his job because of marijuana. But anyway, going back to the tale, these people had been caught red-handed, and I didn't know what to do in order to prevail. But there were a group of lawyers, including Pat Hallinan and a whole number of other lawyers, who were exploring a possibility. And it arose from what was the formal definition of what was a felony at that time. And at that time, at the federal level, marijuana was defined very specifically. Remember what it was?
Well, a gateway drug, or
no, a little bit more than that. Very, very, very technical.
A crime of moral turpitude.
No, it wasn't. You would have thought that it would say marijuana is legal, but it didn't. It didn't say that at all. It said what's illegal is cannabis sativa L, for Linnaeus, the taxonomist.
Yeah.
Well, some of the other lawyers and some scientists were doing research because they had discovered two other alleged species of marijuana.
Right.
Ruderalis, Ruderalis and indica.
Right.
And I forget which one, but the Ruderalis were grown in Afghanistan, so it wasn't very common. But our theory was this. By the time marijuana gets to the street, it's dried.
Yeah.
And no police officer can look at it for purposes of getting probable cause or whatever, or even getting a conviction, and being able to establish that it was cannabis sativa L.
Right.
You can't prove it.
And back then, we didn't have the genetic analysis either.
Well, that's right.
Yeah.
And so that was in progress around the globe. And so we had this great expert who was the head of the Botanical Garden of New York, who had spent 20 years of his life in South Africa rubber plantations. And I had the idea he'd smoked a fair amount of dope in his life. But in any event, he was a very good expert. And he said those are three distinct species. And if they're distinct species and you're only naming one species, by inference, the other two species are excluded. And that was our argument. Well, at that time, the Canadians were doing a lot of research on it, and they were leading the field. And they had an expert. But this guy was, well, think Frank Sinatra. He sat there and grasped the microphone, and he crooned to us. I mean, he was just so articulate and so into his task. And he convinced the judge that, no, they're essentially the same, however you break it down. And now, the judge was a very conservative guy, but we had a lengthy hearing because he was a gardener, and he was fascinated by this. So we were getting into all this technical stuff about cannabis sativa, cannabis ruderalis, cannabis indica, and so on, and the difference between a species and another species. And that seemed to matter a lot. So the judge ruled against us. But at that point, it was such a novel theory that was going around, and we weren't the only one that were going to use it, that the DA just didn't want it to go up on appeal because he didn't want a court of appeal to say, yeah, that judge is right, it's illegal. Effectively, it's illegal. Yeah. And so he gave me just one hell of a deal. I mean, they gave me a walk-away deal, and I was happy with that, but it didn't end up making any precedent. And the way the marijuana thing has developed over years, I think the history of marijuana is its own story, and it's related to a lot of things, including the sociology of the 60s and 70s and up to today. And the law. So that was the story. So the funny part of it for me, you saw my ego board that had the front page headline from the Sacramento paper, "Is marijuana legal?" Well, that was a big deal. And that was the day that Jerry Brown, the governor, got inducted into his second term.
Oh, yeah.
And we got the headline and he didn't. And I kind of got a kick out of that.
Interesting.
All right.
Well, we're going to take a really short break. We will be right back after this. If you're just recently tuning in, my guest this evening is Richard Hodge. Richard Hodge worked as a criminal defense attorney for a long time through the 60s and 70s, and also worked in entertainment law, representing a wide range of clients, and then was ultimately appointed to the Alameda County Superior Court as a judge, where he served for 20 years. He is now retired, and he has been sharing some stories and some insights into work in the legal profession. So, Richard.
Yes, sir.
You've also, among other things, represented a wide range of authors and musicians and entertainers. Are there some particular clients, cases that you dealt with that stand out for you?
Well, let's talk about that for a moment. First of all, we were talking about the social issues that were at stake back in those days. And there was obviously the issue of marijuana. But then there was an interesting thing that happened in the Bay Area, and that was the music industry shifted very dramatically from other parts of the country to the Bay Area. Now, there was this criminal lawyer there called Richard Hodge, who basically was practicing criminal law. And but what was happening at that time, there were a couple criminal lawyers who were getting an occasional entertainment client. Now, why was that happening? Well, this isn't New York, and it's not L.A., and the musicians were not particularly sophisticated in terms of the business practice. And if they were in L.A., they maybe were. If they were in New York, they were, but not up here. So where did they go?
Any lawyer they know.
Yes, and who would that be?
The ones who helped them get out of a drug bust?
Very good, Ken. That's the reason I like doing interviews with you. No, that's right on. That's right. They didn't know where to go to, so where would they go? And so one day, I'm sitting in my office, not even thinking about entertainment world, and who walks into my office but Steve Miller? Now, I knew Steve slightly, and I knew his manager very well. So Steve said, I want you to represent me. And I said, Steve, I don't know anything about music, but I can put you in touch with the best entertainment lawyers in L.A. He said, no, I don't want that. He said, I'm hiring you because you were an ex-prosecutor, and you're a tough lawyer. I've been reading about you in the paper. You're a tough lawyer. And I want you to look at this as a civil rights case, because the musicians in this country are getting screwed over right and left, and they're getting screwed over by the business community and the legal community in Los Angeles and New York. Because, in those dynamics, both sides are feeding at the same trough. The guys who are representing the entertainers next year turn out being a vice president of one of the record companies, and vice versa. So there's just an interplay there, and we don't feel as if we're getting so we want you to go down and take it on. Well, I thought that was a fool's errand. I said, I'm not going to do it, but he insisted. He said he would have it no other way. There was a book out at that time called This Business of Music. It's still in print. It's like patent law for dummies. It's designed for you to look at it and get an idea what it's about. Well, I looked at it. It was pretty solid. It was surprisingly good. It talked about patents and music rights and publishing rights and all this sort of stuff. And it gave me a pretty good guide. But still, I wasn't going to go out into that world based on This Business of Music. So we hit upon a pretty good scheme. Everybody wanted Steve Miller, every record company in the world. So what we did is we carved out right from the outset those record companies that we really were not interested in. And we went and seriously negotiated with them. And we'd raise 15 points. And they'd say, well, we can't give you all that. No one's ever got that. But we'll give you this 1 point. And then we go to the next record company that was not high on our list. And we negotiate. Say, well, you can't. Nobody ever gets those points. But we'll give you this point. So then we went to the third company. They couldn't say no. We already had two that we know that they could give. So by the time we got around to 4 or 5 companies, we had a nice nexus of 5 critical issues that they said, oh, nobody ever gets those, that we had in our pocket, because they said, no, they don't.
Offer from Columbia, right?
We just, whoever we were interested in, we said, go to their rival, and their rival would give it to us. So they wanted to go to Capitol. And so once we had our pins in the line, we went there. And fortunately, Capitol at that time, the president was Alan Livingston, who was just, I don't know if you remember Alan, but he was just a supreme gentleman. He was married to an Olympic swimmer, and he was a very cultured man, fine wine, good food. I mean, he was not what you think of as rock and roll, I'll tell you that. Uh-huh. He was more like somebody doing Pavarotti, maybe. But he was a perfect gentleman, and he wanted Steve Miller. And after we went through a few rounds of negotiation, and we negotiated in his house in Beverly Hills, after we negotiated a few rounds, he said, let's just do a deal. And so we did. We did the deal, and we got everything we wanted. And I was told at that time that we had gotten for Steve the best record contract that any previously unrecorded group had ever gotten. I don't know if that's true, but I've been told that a number of times. And I came across a book that came out 2 years ago about the history of rock and roll, and it says that. So I'll say, yeah, that was it. And I'll just tell you one sidelight that I just found out about it by listening to Howard Stern one time by chance, and Steve was being interviewed. And Steve said how he had gotten this tough prosecutor and had gone to L.A., and he was talking to the Beatles about the deal he'd just gotten, because he had wanted to use the Beatles producer, and he wanted to go to Capitol. So it was a natural thing for Steve to go over and talk to them. And they spent a week together jamming and talking business and so on. And he said a couple of the Beatles were really pissed off because Steve had gotten some stuff that they didn't get. And they figured, well, what is this stuff? We're the Beatles. Who are you? So this just was revealed to me through Howard Stern about, maybe a year ago. But that's the story of how I got started. And then once I represented Steve, I mean, the door was just wide open. I had Boz Scaggs after that, who used to be with Steve Miller. A lot of people don't know that. He was in the Steve Miller band, and I represented him, and we got to deal with him with Columbia and Kenny Loggins, and I had about 20 groups recording on major labels, which was a lot, actually.
Yeah.
And a lot of them, it was a funny business. Artists would come into my office, and by this time it was a lovely Victorian mansion, really, in San Francisco. I think it cost me $75,000 back then to buy.
Right.
I think it sold about 7 or 8 years ago for $6 million.
Wow.
But I wasn't very good at real estate. So,
it sold. You had already let it go.
I had already let it go. I sold it to the Zen Buddhists.
Great.
So,
yeah. So did you stop doing criminal law when you got into entertainment law, or was it kind of an overlap? How did that?
Well, it's an overlap. It leads to another story. Everything leads to another story.
Good.
The artists would come in to my office, and they'd always have a 4-track tape. That's what we had back then, 4-track tapes. Mm-hmm. So I'd listen to it. I said, well, that's interesting. I said, yeah, but you got to hear us live. You got to hear us live. Well, so come out and hear us live. They were playing around town. I was practicing criminal law. I had to get up at 9 o'clock in the morning and go down and represent some felon who maybe just murdered somebody. And I couldn't be starting my evening at 11 o'clock to hear the group play. So I actually opened a nightclub in Berkeley. Our opening night was just extravaganza. We had Creedence Clearwater and Boz and Steve and about several other groups that would only be mainliners at the headliners in L.A. and New York.
Wow.
But then one of my ex-con clients that I gave a job to as bartender was stealing from me. And so very soon we went out of business. But it was a very interesting venue. It could have been a first-rate club. And it's within my lucky stars that I didn't keep that nightclub, because I think as a bartender or a bar owner, I would have had a hard time becoming a Superior Court judge.
Right.
Not sure about that. Jerry Brown was very open-minded, but I don't know if he would have gone that far.
There was a county supervisor who was appointed here in Santa Cruz County when the supervisor who had been elected suddenly died of a heart attack. And that man who was appointed went on to open a bar. So he had the bar after he was supervisor rather than before.
Yeah.
So, you get these appointments, you never know.
You got to be careful. Well, and then part of that, I had the music first, but very soon thereafter, into my office walks Richard Brodigan. Now, I had heard about Richard Brodigan. He was already a legend in the Bay Area.
Yeah, he's a best-selling author.
So I knew who he was, but that's all. And he said, I want you to be my lawyer. And I didn't give him the speech about it. I don't know anything about publishing. I just figured I'd figure it out, and I did. But I became Richard's lawyer, and I was his lawyer for, decades. And I used to call myself that I was Richard's conduit to the outside world, because I took care of all of his, not just the publishing and the things related to his career as a writer, but everything. He had a ranch in Montana, and we bought property for him, and he couldn't drive, and so he was renting he'd rent a car for the summer for his friends to drive around. Well, that was costing him a fortune. So I said, Richard, buy a car. You don't have to drive it to own it. So buy a car and put it up on stilts during the winter. And, so he did. He bought a hot Dodge something or other. I know it was a hot car. had his friends drive him around. But I did everything. We became really good friends. And I traveled with him. Richard was very popular in Japan. And people often ask me why that was the case. I'm not a literary expert, but I always thought that his meter and his rhythm of writing fit very nicely into the Japanese language and into haiku and things of that nature. And so I think that it was very accessible to the Japanese in terms of their language. Whatever it was, well, when I was over there with Richard, it was like being with a rock star or an NBA star. And of course, he's 6'4" or something, and so blonde, and he's walking around, and people would just flock to him. Richard Brodigan. So that was fun, and that led to a lot of writers that I either represented or became very good friends of, which I cherished. In fact, I'll just tell you this one last thing, because it means a great deal to me. I have a bookshelf at home, and I think maybe you saw it, but it's It's got 4 layers and has about 100 books in it. And every one of those books was either written by somebody that I represented, or it was written about somebody that I knew very well, or it was a friend that I knew largely through Richard and other people, and who I knew through the biz, as they say. Yeah. And I was, about a year ago, I was sitting on my couch at night looking up. I looked over, and I came to the revelation, which had not dawned on me, that all of the people represented in that library were dead, with the exception of maybe 4 or 5 people. I was stunned. I mean, I lived with it. The library was there. I'd see it every day. But all that history had just kind of passed away from my mind. I put up a special light for it after that, and this is kind of a little memorial place for these writers. It's also, everyone says I should write a book. And I woke up in the middle of the night having a dream, and I wrote down the essence of the dream. And the note to myself was, Richard, writing the book would be the end of your dreams. It would be, I've watched these people write books and how hard it is. And so you don't want to write that book. Just live with it, enjoy it the way you've got it, and think about it as you take your walks along Westcliff Drive, and that's enough. But I'm never going to write a book. Not now.
For listeners who may have just recently tuned in, my guest is Richard Hodge. Richard Hodge was an attorney who dealt with some of the most controversial and politically charged crime cases of the 70s and 80s. Also worked in entertainment law, and then served for 20 years as an Alameda County Superior Court judge. Which brings me to asking you, how did you get appointed? How did it work out that you got chosen among everybody else that might be chosen to be a Superior Court judge?
We had not talked about that in our preliminary interview, so I've got to give you full marks for that, because it's, to me, there's an interesting answer to it, but I don't know. I was asked that question one time in front of a group of lawyers. Said, how did Richard Hodge ever get to be a judge? And I said, from the back of the room, I said, 2 words, Jerry Brown. There's no governor in the history of this state who would ever have appointed me to a judgeship, at least at that time. It's changed since then. But at that time, judgeships were by and large allocated to older judges, white, who were basically on their way to retirement and just wanted, kind of a sinecure. And it was such a monolithic enterprise. There were so few women. There were so few blacks. There were so few Hispanics. They were old white males.
Well, you fit that profile yourself.
I did, which you're right. That's what makes it kind of interesting. So why did I get appointed? Well, I was sufficiently on the edge that there was some interest in it, and I had represented a Superior Court judge or a Court of Appeal judge who had gotten into difficulty. And I had sold my law office in San Francisco to the Zen Buddhists, which was near and dear to Jerry Brown's heart, although I asked him one time if that was it. I asked Jerry what it was about, and he says, I don't know. I don't know why. Tell me why I should have appointed you. And I went through all the things that I thought might have it. And he said, no, that's not it. That's not it. But I do recognize that on the day I was appointed with 3 other people. One was Japanese, 2 were black, and I was the token white. Uh-huh. And so I was still being fed in there with some attention to that. And I actually have a theory about why I got it specifically in terms of the Asian judge that was appointed had ruled against the appellate court judge's interests in the marijuana case. Just say that. Excellent judge, super good judge, but she was angry. And I can't help but think there was some backroom discussion about it, but I don't know. One last thing and I'm done with it. I had put in my application for a judgeship about a year before, and all of my friends were being appointed, and I was writing letters for them. And I thought, well, maybe I should give it a shot. So I put in an application, and I called the governor's appointment secretary, who I knew pretty well, and I said, Tony, you know, I put my application in, and I think I could put together an impressive array of lawyers who would attest to my worthiness for becoming a judge. I said, but I do not want to ask 20 judges for a favor, because I'm going to feel odd in going in front of them any time in the future. And I didn't like the idea of having to do that. And I also, frankly, didn't like the idea of being beholden to 20 judges for every rubber chicken dinner that came around every time they had to run for an election. I said, so Tony, truthfully, I would just consider it a favor if you would tell me, do I have a chance? And he said, Dick, I wouldn't bother. I said, you really are not in line for this. He said, in the immemorial words for me, he said, Dick, you're not black, you're not brown, you're not gay, you're not a woman, you're just another white lawyer from Berkeley that would sort of like to be a judge, right? And I said, Tony, you got me nailed, and this may sound insincere, but it's very sincere. I appreciate it, because I don't have to go through the process of lining up all the legislative assistants and all the people that were going to have to vouch for me. So I don't have to go through that. Thank you. A year later, I was working late at night, 6 o'clock, and I got a call from the governor's office, and there was a secretary. He says, are you still interested in being a judge? I said, well, yeah, I guess so. They said, well, the governor wants to appoint you.
Without putting in an application at all.
Well, it was already in.
Oh, I see.
And the only reason I didn't withdraw it is I'm such a cheap guy from my Midwestern roots that I didn't bother to spend 25 cents for a stamp to withdraw the application. I just, it's going to sit there in the bottom of the pile somewhere. I thought it was dead. And so that's the whole system. Yeah. Well,
we have just about 3 minutes left.
But wait a minute. I want to tell you about the Hells Angels case.
Tell me about it.
No. It would take half an hour.
Well, okay. I think we have another interview in the future. But I did want to ask you, you once said trial is drama.
Mm.
And most of us have seen plays or movies with very dramatic trial scenes, including To Kill a Mockingbird, for example.
Yes.
So I kind of get that drama has a role in there, but I wonder if you could explain that a little bit more. Like, how does understanding the drama of a court trial make a difference?
Well, I'm going to tell this in a different way because I don't have time to answer that question.
Right.
But I told you that my first day in the DA's office, they took me around to introduce me to all the cases, and then the second day they gave me a jury trial to try. And it was such a great experience. I didn't know what to do. Chicago was a very cerebral law school. We didn't learn anything about how to do anything practically. What I knew about trials was what I'd seen in the movies. I didn't know anything about how to try a case. I kind of knew there were 12 jurors, and that was it. What I remember from the trial, though, somehow I had gotten through picking the jury. I don't know how. And somehow I had gotten engaged enough in the trial that I was actually into it, and I was pacing up and down, and The other side was the defense attorney was a 20-year veteran of the DA's office. He was a real experienced guy. And at one point, he was sitting there at the counsel table, and I was pacing up and down behind him. And he said, "Judge Locke, would you ask Mr. Hodge to sit down? He's walking around behind me. He can see my notes. He's making me nervous." And the judge looked at me, bemused, and said, "Mr. Hodge, take a seat." Now, there was no one in court but us. And you know how every courtroom has got this swinging door between the lawyers and the court and the audience.
Yeah.
So I went through the swinging door and walked to the last spectator seat in the last thing, and I sat down. And what I observed at that point was the jury started laughing. And the lawyer, who was wedded to his seat and never moved from his seat, couldn't see what was going on. And there is the jury laughing. Even the judge started to laugh. And I'm just sitting in the back. I didn't do anything. And I learned at that moment, I can do this. This is drama. And what I learned is the first lesson, which has stayed with me to this minute. When you're a lawyer, you command the courtroom, so that whenever anything comes on, the jury is looking to you. They're not looking to the judge. They're not looking to the other lawyer. They're looking to you to see how you're going to react. That was my lesson.
Well, Richard Hodge, thank you. And I think there's some more lessons in here for you to share, so I hope to have you back in the future.